failures, implantation failure, miscarriages, and male and female infertility. The center also provides full range of infertility investigations and treatments under one roof with most modern IVF lab in India. It is one of the most successful IVF centers in India, and the center also provides comprehensive solution to infertility with holistic approach to the patients. Mom did her graduation from Lady Hardinge Medical College and post-graduation from PG Institute of Medical Sciences. Mom is recipient of many awards, including Honorable Chief Minister's Award for Excellence in IVF and Services in Women's Health in year 2011. PISF Award in 2016, ETV Live Award in 2017, First Ratna Award in 2017, and Health Conclave Award 2019. So with this, may I request and invite Dr. Pelajani for her talk on PCOD management, a holistic approach. Thank
Hello.
you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Doc, for such a elaborative and detailed introduction. And the idea behind this whole exercise is to get ourselves updated with the new developments in the disease understanding, that how this disease is evolving. And we all know that PCOS is such a prevailing disorder now that almost 1 in every 5 females do experience some or the other manifestation of PCO in their lifetime. So, and especially in this part of the world, in India, this disease is increasing day by day, maybe because of our ethnic uh, susceptibility, maybe because of the changes in our diet and lifestyle, and maybe because of certain autoimmune factors, as it has been observed that uh, autoimmune disorders, the coexistence of PCOS with autoimmune disorders have been found more in Indian population compared to the rest of the world. But as far as PCOS is concerned, this disease is evolving day by day, and we are getting ourselves updated with the physiology, with the pathology, and with the etiology of the disease. And with that, every other day new drugs are coming into picture. But one thing that is very clear, that if we need to manage this disorder, there should be a comprehensive approach, and there should be a good amalgamation of the medical management with diet, with lifestyle, and exercise. And in this entire presentation, we'll have sufficient scientific Hello?
Sure, ma'am. Yes, I can do
Yeah,
that.
it will be easy for me.
Chiragala madam.
Yeah. Can I change it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. I got disconnected.
Share screen madam கொடுத்துருங்க.
Ma'am, you can share now.
I can share now?
Yes.
Because it will be easy for me then to
Yeah.
okay, because meanwhile when I'm doing, you can just start with the next slide, then I'll get. Okay, we'll quickly go to the other 1 or 2 slides, and then I'll start doing.
Yes, ma'am.
अपन स्क्रीन शेयर कर देते हैं. नहीं, मेरे लिए इजी हो जाएगा ना ये. शुरू से ठीक है. Yeah, just to get into the flow of the subject, let's have a brief history of how this disease has evolved. Initially, in the year 1935, it was described by Steen and Leventhal, and since then it was known as Steen-Leventhal syndrome. And over a period of time, we got to understand this as a reproductive disorder only, which is characterized by menstrual disturbance and excessive androgen resulting into hirsutism, acne. And then over a period of time, we got to know that all this is because of the excessive ovarian androgen production resulting into increase in the ovarian volume, increase in the stromal thickness. And because of that background into the understanding of the disease came into picture bilateral wedge resection of the enlarged ovary. And thereafter it got the label of Steen-Leventhal disorder, got to know as polycystic ovarian disease. Then over a period of time, as the researchers were going on, we got to know maybe over 20, 30 years ago, that it is not only a disease characterized by androgen dysfunction, it is a syndrome which incorporates a number of metabolic dysfunction where insulin resistance is the culprit, and there is a lot of derangement as far as ovarian environment is concerned, metabolic functions are concerned. So the term PCOD got replaced with PCOS because now it was understood by this time that it not only affect the reproductive career of the female, it do affect because of its metabolic effects and insulin resistance, it do affect the cardiac health, it do affect the lipid metabolism, it makes the female more susceptible to developing diabetes or maybe Alzheimer's later in their life, and it also increases the risk of the ovarian cancers to an extent because of the disturbance within the ovarian environment. So over this period of time, from Steen-Leventhal disorder, we got to know that it is a syndrome which affects multiple systems of our body, and when it need to be managed, the approach should be comprehensive. But till date, the etiology of PCOS is not clear. Still, we do not know that why few females develop PCOD. And if they do have PCO, some women get only the reproductive symptoms. Some are absolutely asymptomatic. Some not only get the reproductive symptoms, but they do also experience hyperandrogenic symptoms in forms of acne, hirsutism, and later on in their life, when the reproductive age group is passed on, they do experience the metabolic dysfunctions as well. So what is there in individual body that some females are susceptible to the disease, some are not, and those who are susceptible to the disease, they present with certain symptoms, and some are absolutely normal. Still, we are working over this, and in this presentation, whatever recent updates are there into the pathophysiology of the disease, we have tried to focus on that. Just to have a brief introduction about the epidemiology of the disease, it is one of the most common endocrine disorders that affect women of reproductive age. It is seen in about 8 to 11% of the reproductive age group. The another age group where it is becoming more common, and it is fact of alarm, is that PCOS is seen more upcoming disease in the adolescent age group. Reason unknown, but adolescent age group, yes, this disease is growing very fast. It is the most common cause of anovulatory infertility in women, and Indians have among the highest prevalence rate in the world of as high as 41% among the reproductive age group. So when we talk about the evolution, we are still in the learning phase. There is lot much to learn about this disease and its management. And if we say that what are the main components of this disease, then the key culprit is the insulin resistance. Insulin resistance not only affect the insulin metabolism, but it has been found to affect the LH and FSH signaling as well. As a result, in the PCO cases, the LH level keep on increasing. It controls the lipid metabolism. Insulin resistance have been found that in PCO patients, somehow because of reason unknown, there is increased insensitivity to the insulin. The cellular response may be because of some resistance in the receptors, or maybe some receptor problem. The response to the insulin in the PCO cell is comparatively less if we compare it with the non-PCO cases. Another kid into the disease physiology is the inositol deficiency. It has been found that those female who were having PCO were having inositol deficiency. Inositol is a vitamin-like protein, and if we talk about in a layman term, inositol is called as the ovarian vitamin, and it has been observed that in PCO cases, the intrafollicular bioinositol levels are comparatively lower in comparison to the non-PCO cases. And this inositol deficiency is responsible for the altered insulin response, resulting into increased insulin resistance, and also altered FSH signaling into the follicle, thus interfering with the follicle growth, final maturation, as well as interfering with the ovulation, and then finally with the oocyte quality. It has also been observed that because of the myoinositol deficiency, there is altered insulin signaling, and insulin dysfunction then disrupts the LH-FSH pathway, and it interferes with the androgen metabolism within the ovaries, creating the hyperandrogenic state. So all these things have been found related with the insulin resistance. So far, whatever knowledge we have gained into the PCO, it has been found that the key culprit is the insulin resistance. Though there are few studies which says that insulin resistance may not play that crucial role, which we think so far in PCO, as the newer things are coming into picture, and which says that even if with improvement in the insulin resistance, many cases did not show any improvement with the symptomatology of the PCO. So maybe there is something else than the insulin resistance which is playing role in the disease physiology. So if we have to have a PCO understanding, then we need to understand that it has 4 different components. So far, they are interrelated and have been found to play an important role into the PCO disease. One is that it has a hormonal pathway which shows that there is an altered FSH-LH signaling, there is increased LH, there is altered sex hormone levels resulting into hyperandrogenic state, and because of which there is hirsutism and acne. There is a metabolic pathway in which insulin resistance is the key culprit, and because of the increased insulin resistance, there is altered lipid metabolism, altered gut functioning because of the increased insulin resistance. It has been found that the intestine becomes more leaky, because as we see that the level of insulin resistance increases, some level of inflammation keep on increasing in the body. And because of that chronic low-grade inflammation continuing in our body, the gut flora get disturbed, which we call as the gut dysbiosis. And once that get disturbed, we develop symptoms of PCOS, like they have constipation. We do give the drugs, but there is impaired absorption of the drug, resulting into poor effect. At times, because of the gut dysbiosis, there is altered sex hormone synthesis and the metabolism, and also there is increased insulin resistance. So all these things are interrelated, and we need to pay attention to one aspect, that PCO is a comprehensive disorder. And still we are learning that how these things are interlinked and how we can put attention to each and every pathway so that the disease can be controlled in a better way. Why it is important that we all as practitioners have seen that whenever a case of PCO comes, and when we advise them management, the 2 essential things that we talk about is the weight management and diet. Why it is important that we should talk about diet and weight management is that in the past few years, it has been observed that there are certain good bacteria within the gut that produces short chain fatty acid, which increases the colonic mucus production and tight junction function. Thus, it makes the gut less leaky. Whereas in polycystic ovarian disease cases, it has been found that the intestinal mucosa becomes more leaky. There is reduction in the inflammation due to reduced passage of the LPS across the gut mucosa, resulting in an impaired insulin sensitivity. So if the gut mucosa is intact, the good bacteria are there, then these short chain fatty acids make the gut less leaky. And if the gut is less leaky, then there is improvement in insulin resistance and there is a drop in the serum insulin level. As a result, the ovaries start functioning into a normal level. But if the gut flora get disturbed, there is bacterial LPS that we call as a lipopolysaccharide. These are the toxin released by the bad bacteria, and all these bacterial toxin make the gut more leaky. As a result, there is constant low-grade inflammation going on into the body, which interfere with the insulin sensitivity. It makes the body more resistant to the insulin, and it also interferes with the lipid metabolism, and it also interferes thus with the androgen production. So it becomes very important that we should take care of our gut flora by giving equal importance to the diet and also to the lifestyle, which can help in relieving the constipation. So this was the concept of low-grade chronic inflammation related with the bacterial LPS, which led into the which led us thinking that if there is disturbance in the gut flora, then maybe because of that disturbance, we are enhancing the insulin resistance and thus making the disease worse. So this was the dogma theory, which says that how insulin resistance play a role in the PCO presentation and why it is important that we should control the insulin resistance. So this was what I was explaining, that in healthy gut, there is a normal intestinal permeability because of the intact intestinal barrier. But in PCOD cases, because of certain unknown reason, there is increased intestinal permeability and there is a damaged intestinal barrier, as a result of which the toxins can pass through the leaky gut, resulting into chronic inflammation. And this chronic inflammation may thus trigger an immune response, resulting into increased insulin resistance and also the altered androgen metabolism. So this was what related, as we all know that we have two kinds of PCO. One is the obese PCO and lean PCO. Earlier it was thought that PCO can affect only to the overweight or to the obese female, but over a period of time we got to know about that it is not only the obesity but also the lean females can affect it with the polycystic ovarian disease. And in fact it is difficult to manage the lean PCO if we compare it with the obese PCO, because with obesity, if we start managing the weight, means if we start losing the fat, the waist hip ratio is maintained. With the time, as we keep on losing fat, the insulin sensitivity keep on increasing. As the insulin sensitivity keep on increasing, the PCO keeps on getting under control. But in lean PCO, where the insulin resistance is high, we cannot say that this increased insulin resistance is primarily because of the fat, because there is no excess fat in the body. And in such cases, it becomes really difficult to improve the insulin sensitivity. So in lean PCO, other things come into picture, like maintaining the gut flora, taking a diet which is rich in protein. Why it is important? Diet rich in protein, we'll talk later in the presentation itself. In lean PCO, it becomes important to improve the muscle mass, because as the muscle mass is improved, insulin sensitivity is improved. So in obesity, we have to focus on reducing the fat. With reduction in the fat, the insulin sensitivity is improved. Whereas in lean PCO, we have to focus on increasing the insulin sensitivity by improving the muscle mass, by improving the gut flora, and also by improving the lifestyle, along with the medication that we're gonna discuss later. So this was, I was telling that in a normal female where there is no PCO, it has been found that the follicular fluid is rich in myoinositol. Whereas in PCO females, the follicular fluid is comparatively poor in myoinositol. And this myoinositol is responsible for maintaining the insulin sensitivity and also is responsible for the FSH signaling. So if there is an altered follicular fluid MI, maybe there is a disruptive growth in the follicle. It may interfere with the ovulation as it interferes with the FSH and LH activity, and also it affects the quality of the oocyte. It has been seen in IVF that in uncontrolled PCO cases, if we stimulate the lady, then the growth get arrested after a certain phase. Means once we reach about 12 to 13 of follicle, then suddenly we see that there is no further growth in the follicle. Then we try to change our gonadotrophins, or at times there is sudden shoot up or arrested growth. Maybe this altered follicular fluid environment is responsible for that. Even if we get the follicle growth, then in uncontrolled PCO cases, when we retrieve the oocyte, we find that most of the follicles are empty. Means the empty follicular syndrome has been found to be more associated in uncontrolled PCO compared to the other females. And even if we get the oocytes, good number of oocytes, the quality of the oocyte in terms of number of M2s, the cytoplasm, it has been observed that the cytoplasm in PCO cases is comparatively dark. The zona may be thick, so the quality of the oocyte is not as good as in non-PCO cases. So maybe all this because of the disturbed microenvironment of the follicles. So this is the entire scenario that how the PCOS, it's a confusing disease where so many things are playing role, though they are all interrelated. There is disrupted levels of myoinositol and D-chiroinositol. There is altered insulin signaling or resulting into impaired glucose metabolism. And impaired glucose metabolism is thus responsible for the chronic low-grade inflammation, which can result into chronic low-grade inflammation in intestine, how it is disrupting the gut flora. We have all known that, and how it is again contributing to the insulin resistance. And this kind of inflammatory response not only seen in the intestine but also in the ovarian theca cells, resulting into hyperandrogenic state, and thus hirsutism, acne, and alopecia. And this altered ovarian response resulting into infertility because of the anovulation or because of the poor oocyte quality. And the another component that insulin resistance is responsible for is that it results into altered lipid metabolism. Hyperinsulinemia is also related with the altered lipid metabolism, and because of this, then the lady becomes more prone to weight gain. So it's a vicious circle. Weight gain resulting into PCO, then it becomes difficult to lose weight. More weight we keep on gaining, and the disease keep on getting worse. So it becomes really difficult to break this vicious circle at times because of the so many components going simultaneously. And so this was all about the gut dysfunction. And if we talk about the pituitary dysfunction, then it has been observed that in PCO cases, there is increase in the frequency and amplitude of the GnRH pulse, which result in elevated levels of LH. Excessive secretion of LH has traditionally been considered as a hallmark of classic PCOS. In fact, it is the LH-FSH ratio which is more important, and it has been found that the ratio of more than 2, especially in the obese women, is significant. Single value of LH or FSH may not help us in diagnosing the PCOS. It is the ratio, especially on day 2, 3, or day 4 of the menstrual cycle, which is more conclusive of the diagnosis of PCOS. Abnormal LH influences on the theca cells of the ovaries result in overproduction of the androgens. All patients of PCO do not have elevated levels of LH, but still they have elevated levels of androgens. This can be explained on the finding that ovarian theca cell of women with PCOS have elevated cytochrome P17 gene expression. So because of this, hyperandrogenism is the most common feature, even if it is not associated with elevated LH levels, but androgen levels are elevated in most of the cases. So just to summarize, we do have certain environmental factors, though there are many, but we cannot be definitive because the disease etiology is still not clear. There can be certain genetic factors, because it has been found that PCO is more common in certain ethnic groups, and it is more common in elite groups. It is more common in malnourished, but earlier it was thought that PCOS is the disease of the elite class. But in last few years, it has come to known that PCO also affect to the girls who are malnourished. Malnourished, maybe they can be overweight as well as underweight. So those who are protein deficient in their diet, those who have poor nourishment, those who have low BMI, they are also susceptible to PCO. So it is no more a disease of obese females. It can also affect the lean thin girl. So what all genetic factors contribute to inositol deficiency and thus to PCO is still not clear, but yes, few factors have been identified. Then this inositol deficiency is interrelated with derailed insulin signaling, and this increased insulin resistance is thus related with pituitary dysfunction, impaired androgen metabolism. Development of insulin resistance is then related with the other metabolic dysfunctions as well. So if we have to talk about the clinical features, then we can categorize the PCO clinical presentation into three parts. One, there can be a gynecological presentation in the form of a disturbed menstrual cycle. Mostly it is the oligohypomenorrhea, or it can be infertility, because most of the time PCO have an ovulatory cycle, or if they do have ovulatory cycles, then the oocyte quality is usually poor, resulting into poor fertilization and infertility or subfertility. Second, it do have certain metabolic presentation in the form of increased insulin resistance, obesity, increased chances of developing type 2 diabetes mellitus, acanthosis nigricans, altered lipid metabolism that can later on increases the risk of heart disease or can increase the risk of thrombotic episodes as well. And third, it has certain androgenic symptoms in the form of alopecia, hirsutism, or acne because of the altered androgen environment within the ovary as well as in the circulation. So, and also it increases the risk of the endometrial cancers because of the persistent oligoovulatory or anovulatory cycle that result into endometrial hyperplasia. And also there is PCO is coexisting with infertility. So endometrial hyperplasia and infertility increases the risk of the endometrial cancers later in life. It can result into acne because of the hyperandrogenic state and also because of the coexistent inflammatory process going on in the body. It can result into hirsutism because that is the excessive facial hair growth, and it acts primarily by the androgen receptors and the secretory factors. Androgen increases the growth rate, diameters, and melanization of the hair in androgen sensitive areas. And the hair that we develop in PCO are usually thick, coarse, terminal hair in the androgen dependent areas, point to an underlying hyperandrogenic state. And also acanthosis nigricans and alopecia, they're typically thick, dark, velvety skin situated on the nape of the neck, axilla, groins, basically the folds. And the other frictional areas may often be the first clue of insulin resistance. These skin lesions are basically the signs of the insulin resistance. We also see these symptoms in cases of diabetes as well, or in cases of morbid obesity. It's not like that if we find acanthosis nigricans or alopecia, it is only in the PCO. We can see in other disease where insulin resistance exists. These are just the pictures that how PCOS can present to us. So if we talk about the diagnostic criteria, I must say that PCOS is over as well as underdiagnosed disease. But we have to keep certain things in mind that over a period of time, different criteria, different diagnostic criteria have come into picture. But the most common one which we follow, and I think you people also follow, is the Rotterdam 2003 criteria, which says that PCO can be diagnosed if two of the following three symptoms are there. One is the oligo or the anovulation. Second is the clinical and or biochemical signs of the hyperandrogenism, and third is the polycystic ovaries or ultrasound. But even these criteria, they keep on changing with every meeting that we attend. They keep on adding or subtracting one or the other criteria. So, but till date, the most common diagnostic criteria to be followed for the diagnosis of PCO is the Rotterdam 2003. If we have to do the hormonal assays for the diagnosis of PCO, when it should be done, the ideal time to do the hormonal assay is in the pre-ovulatory phase. That is the close to the ovulation, that is the 14th day. But as we all know that in PCO cases, the cycles are disturbed. There is no fixed day of ovulation. Most of the cycles are anovulatory. That's why it becomes important to do all these hormonal assays between day 2 to day 4 of the cycles. We can do the FSH and LH both on these days. It is important that we calculate the FSH LH ratio rather than the elevated LH level itself. We know that in PCO cases, we may not find the isolated increase in the LH levels, but in most of the cases, FSH LH ratio is disturbed. So it becomes important that we should measure both these two hormones. As we all know that FSH and LH levels, they changes with the day of the menstrual cycle. So it should be measured on the fixed day, that is day 2nd to day 4th of the cycle, to have a better correlation of the LH and FSH. And other hormones that can be measured, it can be androstenedione levels, it can be testosterone, it can be insulin levels, but it all depends upon case to case. All the hormones, all the blood tests should not be offered to every individual. We should go through a careful history. We should do a careful examination, and after a detailed history and thorough examination, we can conclude that what all investigations are needed in particular case of PCO. Suppose if a female comes to us with severe grade of hirsutism, means there is very high level of androgens in the body. All these things, they raise the suspicion that maybe there is something else than PCO responsible for the hyperandrogenic state resulting into these or severe hirsutism or acne. In such cases where we see that there is no other feature of PCO, only features of hyperandrogenism are there, and there is a strong history or maybe another points in the history which suggest that maybe we are dealing with adrenal tumors or non-classical adrenal hyperplasia. So these are the cases where we should go for tests like 17-hydroxyprogesterone level, or maybe testosterone free and total testosterone. We can go for androstenedione levels, and in certain cases where there is high index of suspicion of adrenal tumors, we can think of imaging studies as well to rule out the adrenal tumors. So the idea behind all these points is that we should not jump to investigations once we see the polycystic ovaries on ultrasound. Finding the polycystic ovary on ultrasound only is not the diagnostic feature for PCOD. We should have a thorough history and examination to see what all coexisting findings are there. And based upon those history points and examination, we should decide what all blood investigation the lady should be offered. So just to conclude, insulin levels may be increased in a majority of patients with PCOS. The hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp technique is, I have seen, just a personal thought over this, that I've seen many people prescribing serum insulin level just for the diagnosis of PCO, but it is not the way, just the fasting serum insulin level. Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes, ma'am. We can hear you. Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah,
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, the insulin level may be increased in a majority of patients with PCOS. We have seen that serum fasting insulin is being prescribed for the diagnosis of PCO. It's a fact that hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp technique is gold standard for assessing insulin sensitivity, but is impractical in everyday practice. So simply by doing the serum fasting insulin level, we cannot check for the insulin resistance. If the insulin levels are high, it does not mean that the lady is having insulin resistance. Rather, a ratio of fasting glucose to fasting insulin is a simple and effective alternative. A ratio of less than 7 is highly suggestive of hyperinsulinemic state. The practical guidance for that is a fasting serum insulin level more than 15 and a serum insulin level post 75 gram glucose of more than 25 can also serve as rough guide to a hyperinsulinemic state. But to share my personal experience, I have never done fasting insulin for the diagnosis of PCO because I have found it more confusing. It's more important that we should do a detailed transvaginal ultrasound. We should give due importance to history and the symptoms, and if needed to FSH and LH. Another kid into the hormonal investigation is the anti-Mullerian hormone. We have seen that in most of the cases of PCOS, AMH is pretty high, but it is not the case in all PCOD patients. PCOS high, if we take it, though it is not an evidence-based practice, I'm still collecting data on it, that if AMH is more than equal to 10 and the ovaries are bulky, I have observed that such kind of females, they are not responsive to the medical management. And if we go for ovulation induction, either we land up into an ovulation or into the failed cycles, it result because of the failed fertilization. And if we have tried IVF in such cases, the quality of the oocyte was also very bad. So these are the candidates where we can think of ovarian drilling to reduce the ovarian theca cells by drilling at the ovarian stroma. And after drilling, maybe 2 or 3 months later on, these females, they become more responsive to the medicines. Then the cycles become ovulatory, either naturally or with the medicines, and also the quality of the oocyte do get improved. So there are many other tests like FSH LH ratio is another good test we can do, which are much simple and easy to interpret rather than doing all these difficult tests like insulin, and then you are landing up into confusions. I'm not able to change the slide. Can you help me with that? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
I think it's hanged up. Can you help me changing the slide? I'm not able to switch on to next slide.
Rather than, yeah, sure.
Shall I approve you?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
I did. Yeah.
Ma'am,
No,
can
I'm
you
not able to.
share it again? It got stuck, I guess. Your bandwidth is very low, ma'am.
My bandwidth.
Yeah, your internet connection.
Let me check again. Let me switch on to next, to the another internet connection. Slides भी नहीं आ रही हैं. Sorry for all these disturbance. Hmm.
Now it is coming.
Yes. Yeah. So the investigations must be done to rule out underlying metabolic abnormality and include blood sugar and lipid profile as well. The physical evaluation must include BMI calculation and whether patient has central obesity, as these patients are at high risk of developing metabolic syndrome. In fact, now the current concept is that more than BMI, it is the waist hip ratio which is more important and should be focused upon, especially in PCO cases where we tell the woman to lose weight. So more than weight, it is the inches that need to be targeted. So when we talk about management of PCOD, as we have all understood in our previous slides, that not a single entity is responsible for PCO. Till date, we are not clear about the etiology of the disease, why few females do develop this disease, why others don't. And those who have disease, what is the exact reason for that? It is only the insulin resistance or the myo-inositol or the inositol disorders related with it, or it is the other metabolic dysfunctions, or it is certain genetic disorder or autoimmune disorders which are responsible for the development of PCO. So when we have to manage PCO, it's a big challenge. We have to give equal importance not only to the medicine and the surgical intervention, but also to the other component, that is the diet, lifestyle, as well as weight management. One thing that we need to counsel to all the females who are suffering from this disease, that the treatment is only symptomatic and need-based. We cannot get rid of PCO by any means. It's like I usually take the example of diabetes to explain to my patient, like once a diabetes, it's always a diabetes. But there are few cases where we can manage the diabetes just with good diet control and exercise. There are few who require just the oral hypoglycemic agents. There are few who will be requiring insulin. But it's never that we can give diabetic patient a medicine what they are supposed to take for a few days and thereafter they are rid of diabetes. PCO is exactly the same. We can keep it under control, but we cannot get rid of it. And when we are talking about the control, we need to address the need of the female. If we are dealing with the adolescent female, then maybe her prime concern is the hirsutism, acne, or the disturbed periods. When coming to a reproductive age group, the prime concern may be the infertility and the menstrual disturbance. Talking about perimenopausal and menopausal female, the prime concern may be metabolic dysfunctions. There may be increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes, and maybe because of their weight, PCO, disturbed menstrual cycles, there are increased chances of developing endometrial cancers, and maybe because of the metabolic dysfunction, we are concerned about the other systemic disorder. So it's always we need to address that what exactly the symptoms and the issues which are bothering the female, and accordingly we can manage. But the crux is that diet and lifestyle management is common in all management options. So when we talk about the drugs, then the drugs which can work on insulin resistance may be metformin and insulin sensitizers like pioglitazone, rosiglitazone. When we talk about menstrual disturbance, when it is only the issue, then we can think of using oral contraceptive pills. But when the menstrual disturbance is associated with infertility, then we can think of using ovulation induction agents, which will either result into pregnancy or will result into a normal menstrual cycle. When hirsutism or acne is the issue, then we can think of the anti-androgen drugs or like spironolactone, cyproterone, flutamide, all these drugs. So depending upon the needs, the drugs need to be given. And the newer drugs that we can think of will be the myo-inositol, D-chiroinositol, even vitamin D has been found to play an important role in the PCO metabolism. It itself is a very big topic to be talked about in this small presentation, but yes, vitamin D also play an important role. Then in morbid obese cases where metformin and pioglitazone are not that effective because the weight loss is not that significant with all these drugs, then we can think of using glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist like liraglutide. These helps in reducing the weight, and once the weight is lost, then we maybe insulin resistance will improve. So in cases of PCO with morbid obesity, we can try these new drugs. And then there are newer proteins into picture which can help in reducing the gut inflammation. And once the gut inflammation is reduced, then indirectly the androgen metabolism is improved, indirectly the insulin resistance is improved, and we can use for that certain proteins or maybe some probiotics to improve the gut flora. So all these agents are there to help us in managing the PCO. So as I've already mentioned that how these agents act, lifestyle modification is there, how metformin work, thioglitazone work. So all these things are there, but the drugs need to be given for a decently good period of time, at least for 12 weeks to get to know whether these drugs are effective or not. And since these drugs are used for a longer period of time, their side effects need to be told to the lady in advance so that they are not in a panic mode or should get scared once they develop these side effects. And for how long these drugs can be safely used, they should be told. Managing menstrual disturbance, again, I have told that if planning the baby is not an issue, then we can think of using oral contraceptive pills or progesterone only pills or just luteal phase progesterone to regulate the cycles and combat the effect of the endometrial hyperplasia. But if the patient wishes to conceive, then we may need to use the ovulation induction agents so that the timely ovulation can be achieved. If ovulation is achieved, either the lady will get pregnant if there are no other coexistent factors, or will have a normal menstrual cycle. So if we need to manage the menstrual disturbance, it all depends that what exactly the couple wish to. And secondly, if there is endometrial hyperplasia, coexistent endometrial hyperplasia, then progesterone therapy gonna be more effective than using the oral contraceptive pills alone for PCO cases. This is for the management of hirsutism. I think I'm going to skip this. Otherwise, we're going to take very long and won't be able to finish the topic well in time. And I have already mentioned about the role of the ovarian drilling. I request everyone that please do not jump into ovarian drilling once you find polycystic ovaries during laparoscopy. Because we have come across many females with premature ovarian failure or reduced ovarian reserve as a result of ovarian drilling. Ovarian drilling should be offered only in cases where you find that there is medical resistance, means you have tried the drugs and still there is no ovulation. And prior doing the drilling, good practice point is to measure the AMH levels. If the AMH levels are high, then you can go for drilling, and if the AMH levels are low, then in polycystic ovarian cases, drilling should be avoided. And when we are going for drilling, just keep in mind that do not go for an overzealous drilling. Just keep the rule of 4 in mind. Keep the current to 40 watt. Just keep 3 or 4 punctures in the ovary. The depth should not be more than 4 millimeters, and the drilling should be into the stroma, not into the follicle side. It should be into the ovarian stroma and anti-mesenteric border, so that we are not disrupting the ovarian vasculature. After all these things, in fact, there are many papers which says about the etiology, physiology, disease management, but still there are many questions which are unanswered, and we are looking for the answers. What causes insulin resistance? What causes LH and FSH dysfunction? It is only the altered insulin sensitivity which is responsible, or it is the MI, intrafollicular MI dysfunction, which is responsible, or is there any other factor? Is ionositol deficiency the root cause of PCOD? OCPs artificially induces menses with potentially serious side effect. Is there an alternative? It has been seen that every female should menstruate at least 3 or 4 times in a year, so as to avoid the increased risk of endometrial cancer. So shall we give withdrawal, or shall we wait for the normal periods to come, which is beneficial? Is metformin sufficient drug to manage insulin resistance? Is there something which is better than metformin? Diet and exercise is a practical challenge. It is easy to advise, very easy to advise, but it is, trust me, it is very difficult. So I always prefer calling my patients almost every month or two, just to find out that how they are progressing as far as their weight management is concerned. And if you cannot call, just give them a call or tell them to keep you updated about their progress in their diet and exercise schedule, just to keep them peppy and charged up for the this difficult task. I have talked about all these things, so I'll just skip. A new kit that I want to talk about is the alpha lactoalbumin. It's a protein-like component, or you can say it's a bioactive peptide, or you can say it's a gut vitamin. It helps in making the gut less permeable. It's a multifunctional protein. It's part of the group of proteins with roles beyond nutrition. It includes enzyme activity. It enhances nutrient absorption. It stimulates growth. It modulates the immune system, and it provides defense against the pathogens. And it does, because of all these properties, it helps in reducing the chronic low-grade inflammation, which has been found as a culprit in the PCO. By reducing the inflammation, it does correct the insulin receptor function. It reduces the insulin resistance. It reduces hyperinsulinemia. It reduces hyperandrogenemia. So if we have to talk about the 4 pillars of PCOD management with myo-inositol, then there should be an optimum doses of 2 to 4 grams per day. The ratio should be 40:1. That is the optimal ratio for the drug to be more effective. Taste and acceptability by patient impacts the efficacy. So we need to see how we can increase the compliance. Tablets and capsules have lower absorption and can alter the efficacy. So it's better to give the powder form. So this is all what I can find, though there is lot much to talk about PCO, and lot much to talk about PCO, but I could find only these recent advances. And a new drug that I just forgot to introduce into my presentation was liraglutide. It's a GLP-1, that is a glucagon-like peptide receptor agonist. And this agent has been found to be very effective in weight loss when we compare it with other agents like metformin and rioglitazone. So in cases of morbid obesity, where we have tried enough of diet, lifestyle, and the drugs, and the couples and the lady is not able to lose weight, then this drug can be a good trial. I'm done, Doc. So can we have the questions or the suggestions?
Yes, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the excellent talk. There are a few questions in the chat box, so I'll read out to you. There is one question from Dr. Kavita, that is there any evidence that metformin is carcinogenic?
Till date, not significant data that we can say that metformin is carcinogenic. Yes, it has been found to be hepatotoxic, but enough of trial has been done, and we have been using this drug for a pretty long time, not only in cases of PCO, but also in diabetic cases. So I don't think so that statistically significant carcinogenic effect of metformin is there. It can be used safely.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. There is another question from Dr. Nehalani. Is the role of berberin in metabolic syndrome associated with PCOS?
See, berberin is a phytochemical. It has been found in, it's been found in many natural products as well. And it has seen that berberin, like metformin, has been seen in improving the insulin resistance. So it improves the insulin sensitivity. Also, it helps in improving the glucose metabolism. So berberin can be a good alternative, and also it is safe as it is more of, it's a natural substance. So we can use berberin, but till date, not enough studies have been done which can say that it is a level A recommendation to use berberine. But yes, many trials have been done and they have found that berberine can be used effectively to control the insulin resistance. But let me be very honest, I have tried berberine in few cases and have not found it better than metformin. The only advantage of berberine was that it was better tolerated compared to metformin because of less GI side effects.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. There is another question from Dr. Kavita. What is the role of N-acetylcysteine in PCOS?
Again, all these, there are a lot many agents which claims to work on insulin resistance. So this is one of those agents. But I have gone through the literature and I found that among all, metformin was the most effective one, but it is one of those kids around to manage the insulin resistance.
Right, ma'am. The next question is from Dr. Harika, and the question is how long we can use OCPs?
How long we can use?
OCPs.
Dr. Harika, it all depend upon that why we are prescribing OCP. If we are giving OCP to manage the adolescent PCO, it can be safely used for a year, 2 or more. If we are using OCP just to control the polycystic ovary in a woman who otherwise wish to plan pregnancy, then before going for ovulation induction, it's a good practice to use OC pills for 2 to 3 cycles, and then you can go for ovulation induction. And if we are using for a peri or postmenopausal females, then we have to look for other factors, that other risk factors, that whether the lady is prone for thromboembolic episodes or is there any contraindication for the use of OCP. Then also up to the age of 40-45 years, if there are no risk factors, we can safely use for 2 to 5 years. It all depends that what is the idea behind using OCPs.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. The next question is, can we continue metformin after conception?
Yeah, we can continue metformin after conception. Nowadays, there is enough data which says that metformin is safe and has not been found to cause any malformation in the fetus. In fact, in all high-risk pregnancies, we do continue metformin for the first 3 months, means the first trimester, as it reduces the risk of miscarriages, and also it reduces the risk of GDM. So we do continue, it's safe. And in cases who are undergoing for IVF, giving metformin during the stimulation and post-stimulation phase also reduces the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So we do give metformin, and there is sufficient data to support that it is safe during pregnancy. In fact, nowadays, diabetologists are giving metformin even to control GDM or type 2 diabetes in pregnancy, instead of giving insulin to all.
And the question is regarding metformin only. Are there any kidney side effects with metformin?
Not significant, but those patients who are already renal patients, they may develop. Otherwise, metformin has only hepatotoxicity to an extent, not significant effect on kidney until or unless the lady is a renal case.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, there is a lot of data you presented on myoinositol. So can it be given as a single agent or in combination? So what is your preference?
To be very honest, no. As I've said that till date, there is no clear-cut etiology or pathophysiology of PCO. We have seen that so many confusing theories are there. Some says that it is only the insulin resistance. In some papers, it is like insulin resistance does not play any role. In some, it is like certain genetic predisposition. In certain cases, it is certain autoimmune predisposition. So I do not think that till date, there is any single agent, be it metformin, be it myoinositol, be it berberine, be it statins, be it melatonin, which can be prescribed as a blanket therapy. And we can say that, okay, this single agent gonna work for all. We need to individualize cases, and we need to focus what exactly the need of and the concern of the lady is. And maybe even after starting the therapy, if you do not see any improvement in 3 to 6 months, we may need to add the other component or replace it. So I will not suggest any of these drug as a wholesale modality to control PCO. That's why I have, in the beginning, I said that it's a khichdi. It's a khichdi. So we need to give importance and equal share to each and every component. Yes, medicine do play a role, but I will not say that one particular agent. There is an equivalent role of diet and exercise. Even uh, time did not permitted me, but there are significant studies which says that certain kind of yoga and exercises and weight training, especially those that help in building the muscle mass, also helps in improving the insulin resistance, and thus it can help in controlling the PCO.
Thank you, ma'am. So continuing to the earlier question, there was another question from Dr. Malti that can we give metformin and myo-inositol together? So,
Yeah,
yes.
we can give. Yeah,
Yeah.
we can give.
Yes.
See, it's like a cocktail. PCO management is like a cocktail, but we need to be smart enough to understand the taste of the patient, and at the same time, we should be smart enough to make sure that our cocktail should be safe. So, depending upon the need of the patient, availability, response, we can have amalgamation of agents, but I'll not prefer that too many drugs should be given. One or two agents at time, yes, can be given. Maybe you can combine metformin with myo-inositol. You can only give myo-inositol with berberine, maybe metformin with vitamin D. It all depends what exactly you want and how your patient is responding.
Right, ma'am. Ma'am, we have a Apcot brand, and there is a question for that Apcot. What is the dosage? So we prescribe, it's in a sachet form, and it is given twice a day, and 3 to 6 months is the duration for the treatment. So that is just for the doctors, I am informing. The next question is from Dr. Shalini Gupta. She is asking about the choice of OC pills in adolescents.
I would like to answer Dr. Shalini's question, but before that, Dr. Meenakshi is putting up that she wants to say a few words. Yes, Dr. Meenakshi, you are most welcome. In fact, I would really appreciate if you can add on to my knowledge and to everyone's knowledge. If you are comfortable, maybe Alka can unmute you and you can speak, or maybe you can put your suggestion in the chat box. Dr. Shalini, a choice of OCP in adolescent, before making the choice, I would suggest that in adolescent, we should not jump to oral contraceptive pill as a first choice because of too many issues. Number one is the compliance. Second is the fear that why the oral contraceptive pill are being prescribed. Every mother has a fear that giving hormonal pills to such a young girl may be problematic in the future. So we should first focus on diet and lifestyle management. They should be told that even if they are menstruating once in 45 days to 2 months, provided they are taking good care of their diet and they're managing their waist-hip ratio, it's fine. Still, if they are not able to menstruate, then oral contraceptive pill, low dose third generation oral contraceptive pills can be given, or you can give them a 15 days, 2 weeks progesterone course in every cycle so that they have withdrawn. Primarily oral contraceptive pill, a low dose estrogen and drospirenone is, I think, good enough.
Right, ma'am. Thank you. There is another question from Dr. Pranali. Is there guidelines for thin PCOS patients?
As such, there is no clear-cut guideline, but in thin PCO, again, if we need to target upon the insulin resistance, two things need to be focused on. That we need to build, in thin PCO, medicine role is more compared to the obese PCO, because in obese PCO, as we keep on losing the weight, insulin resistance will keep on improving. But in thin PCO, there is no such role. In such cases, we need to improve the insulin resistance by improving the muscle mass, because once the muscle mass is improved, insulin sensitivity is improved. So muscle building exercises should be promoted. These are the cases where high protein diet, because the protein that I have mentioned is found in all mammalian protein. So if we suggest a high protein diet, then it helps in reducing the chronic inflammation which is going on in the intestine as well as in the ovarian theca cells. So all this help in improving the insulin resistance. And third, what we can do in lean PCO cases is we can try a combination of instead of giving metformin, we can try using myoinositol, because compared to metformin, weight loss is less with myoinositol. So this is good. And also vitamin D supplementation should not be forgotten, especially in Indian females, as we are though close to equator, but some or the other reason, maybe because of the receptor abnormalities or absorption malabsorptions, vitamin D deficiency is pretty common. And vitamin D deficiency has been found to play significant role in PCOS. So in lean PCO, muscle building, high protein diet, myoinositol, and fourth is the vitamin D. You can try these combinations.
Right, ma'am.
We give combination of OC pills and metformin. Yeah, in obese cases, you can give OC pills and metformin, especially in women who are wishing to have baby. Then you can continue metformin for a longer period of time, and just to have a quick and a better response to the ovulation induction agent. Then prior to induction, we can use 2 or 3 cycles of OC pills. When to add D-chiro to myoinositol? It is a tricky question, and I think better than me, any pharmacologist or their research team can answer, because D-chiro and myoinositol, D-chiro has been found to act more on glucagon metabolism, and myoinositol act more on glucose metabolism. So when exactly to add, to be very honest, Dr. Sanjana, I do not know. Maybe I'll look up to this, and if I'm able to find out the answer to this question, I would love to text you. What is the holistic approach exactly? Is it diet and exercise? Dr. Alka, it is combined. Diet and exercise and medicine. Holistic approach is when we give equal share and equal importance to all the babies. So we need to give importance to diet. When we talk about diet in PCO, it should be high protein, low carb and low fat diet with decently good amount of diet rich in probiotics. So when we prescribe diet, the diet should be rich in roughage, because this roughage filled diet avoids constipation. When we are avoiding constipation, we are reducing the inflammation. And also the diet which is full in roughage helps in maintaining the good flora of the intestine. So the diet should be high protein, high roughage, low fat, low carb. And when we talk about exercise, exercise should be a good mix of cardio as well as weight training. Cardio is just to lose the weight, and cardio is to build the muscle mass. So in females who are obese, if we simply do the cardio exercise, they'll keep on losing the weight, but the toning will not be there. So over a period of time, either they will stop losing the weight, or the effect will not that be good in improving the insulin sensitivity. But if we couple the weight losing exercise, that is the cardio, with the weight training, that will help in toning the body, effect will be very good. And in lean PCO, toning exercises are more important rather than the cardio. So it's not that only diet or exercise, diet, exercise, medicine, and where needed, even the surgical intervention should be given. Metformin dosage you prescribe for infertility patient. We give 1500 milligram per day or 1000 milligram sustained release per day. We prefer to start metformin at least 2 to 3 months before going for the infertility treatment, and we continue till the lady conceive. And if she conceive, especially if she is obese, then we continue till the first trimester.
Right. Dr. Meenakshi wants to add few words. So Chitra,
Yeah, please.
Chitra is
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi.
Unmute.
And welcome.
Is it possible to unmute?
Yeah, you can do it. You are managing, na? Yeah, you can do it.
Can I speak? Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
Dr. Meenakshi. Hello, Dr. Meenakshi.
Hello, ma'am. At the outset, I would like to thank everybody for an excellent deliberation. Ma'am, I'm a family physician basically, so I've learned something very new today about the gut dysbiosis and the low-grade chronic inflammatory state. I think this is very important for a family physician. And I was also thinking and wondering about how one could allay that, and if there was any role of probiotics in this.
Yeah, I have already said that. See, basically, when we talk about the gut inflammation, it is the altered gut flora where the bad bacteria outshines the good flora. And especially with the kind of diet we are taking nowadays, which is so much processed, all these processed food items, they take longer time to get out from the gut. So the longer the waste material is staying in our body, more toxins are being released. Bad bacteria are outgrowing in number, so all these things are contributing to inflammation, and more or less whatever we are consuming, it's rich in pesticides and preservative. So the probiotics, be it natural or artificial, I have found it very effective. Though I have not used this protein till date, it's a new kid. I do prescribe a combination Ecoflora or Combinon, which are the lactobacillus. And if the lady cannot afford, I do tell them to have Yakult. Yakult is the probiotic drink available,
Yes.
or tell them to have homemade curd. So all these things help not only in managing PCO, but they also help in managing the weight.
Yes,
So
that's
this is a
what I
good,
thought.
yeah.
That would be very important. And I just wanted to thank you ever so much, ma'am. It was excellent, and I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi. Thank you.
One last question can we take? Lean unmarried PCOS patients with
I have
endometrial.
already answered that. I've already answered that.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Ma'am, then there are no more questions. I would also add that Upcod Max is available, so which is also works on gut dysbiosis. So that's a request to the doctors to use it in PCOS patients. So with this, ma'am, thank you. Thank you very much for your excellent talk and giving us time. So it was very.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for sparing their time and giving me an opportunity not only to share knowledge with you, but also to upgrade my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.